Hello, I'm John with the Christian Century, and I'm joined today by Allyson McKinney Timm, who recently wrote a piece for the magazine about abortion and abortion laws. And so we're going to chat about that article. But first, Allyson, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. It's good to be with you. I am a lawyer who specializes in human rights. I've been in this field over 20 years now. I am also the founder and executive director of Justice Revival. We are a ministry focused on inspiring, educating, and mobilizing Christian action for human rights here in the United States.
That's great. Well, I will say I really appreciated the article you wrote for the Century. It was personal, it was philosophical, legal, a lot of really helpful stuff. Um, First, I just wanted to point out a specific phrase that you said that I think might catch some people off guard a little bit. You said in the article that overturning Roe doesn't honor motherhood, it degrades it. And I just thought for some people, especially people who have been around some anti-abortion circles, that might be a little bit shocking. I just thought maybe you could describe a little more about why it would be degrading, the overturning of Roe to motherhood.
Yeah. So the reason I say that is because with the Dobbs versus Jackson ruling from the Supreme Court in June, that will now allow legislatures to, as some have begun to do, to restrict abortion perhaps altogether. What that is essentially doing is allowing lawmakers to create an entitlement to birth. And I begin the article with a really personal birth story, reflecting on what I understand my own mother went through when I was born, and just reflecting on the sacrifice, the pain and suffering, the uncertainty, and then the uniquely self-giving act of carrying and then birthing a child into this world. And really, the question I want to put to readers and put to the audience is that something we feel entitled to demand from anyone, including our own mothers? I think this is what's gotten lost in the discourse, moving from overturning Roe to the claim that some have made that a right to life should prohibit all abortion. And essentially, that is making birth a matter of entitlement rather than recognizing it as an incredible sacrifice and a heroic sort of self-giving act. It's reducing it to something that is minimalistic, that's required. I can throw out one other philosophical term for those who are interested. It's essentially, I'm saying that birth is supererogatory, and that to fulfill something that's demanded as a matter of right is not supererogatory. It's just to do what is required, and that's how I'm trying to distinguish these things.
Wow, thanks. I know you described in the article that a lot of anti-abortion arguments are myopic, really focusing in on questions of, for instance, when does personhood attach to a developing fetus? I just wondered if you could say a little more about that, why these arguments are so myopic, what are they missing that is needed in the discussions about abortion ethics and abortion law?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly part of the limitation of the dialogue that's going on. There's this assumption that that deciding this very philosophical or ontological question of when personhood begins can almost be thought of as a semantic issue, but there's an assumption that solves the difficult questions around abortion. What I wanted to do was to step back and say the right to life provides us with a framework to scrutinize this whole situation. And so let's step back and use it. And to get just a little theoretical, in theory, a right has three parts. It has a person who holds a right, it has the content or substance of the right, and it has an institution or a person on the other side of the equation. That's the one against whom a right is asserted. So I cite in the article this fantastic book by Amesbury and Newlands, Faith and Human Rights. And for anyone who's interested in this, it really breaks it down quite lucidly in chapter 2. So X has a right to Y in relation to Z. When we're dwelling on the personhood issue, we're looking at the X only. Is there a person who can be considered a rights holder? And as I mentioned in the article, because this is a philosophical question that eludes consensus, because it's a theological question that different religions and cultures have answered differently over time and at the present time, it's not the kind of a question that a court is well situated to decide. But even if we had an answer to that, it would still be only 1/3 of the rights equation. We still need to look at what's being claimed and in relation to whom. And that's really what my article is about, those second two parts of the equation.
Yeah, and in helping us understand how this fleshes out in actual situations, you look to other areas where there are rights, claims, obligations, elements of sacrifice. You talk about organ donation, you talk about military conscription. I'm wondering, you could pick one, maybe the organ donation, but it's up to you. If you could just walk us through a little bit more what we can learn by thinking about reproductive rights alongside something like organ donation and seeing how the law is similar or different in those different areas.
Yeah, so I was trying to think of which cases are most closely analogous, which are most similar to childbirth. And so where is it instructive for us to look at some past precedent, past legal precedent? I think organ donation and other ethics scholars I conferred with also seem to agree that organ donation is our most closely analogous case, and that the law around this is really going to be probative and illuminating on the abortion issue. Organ donation involves self-sacrifice, bodily sacrifice of a sort of an intentional nature on behalf of another individual. And so it's striking when you look at the legal precedent and you see how uniformly, unequivocally, courts reject the idea that an organ donation, that even a blood transfusion could be demanded or required on pain of legal penalty. And one opinion was very good about separating out what the court assessed to be moral and praiseworthy as compared to what the court felt it was just to enforce through the judicial system. And there's, as folks will see when they read the article, there's some strong words about how frightening it is to think about that sort of bodily sacrifice being a matter of a judicial sort of decree. And so it's hard for me to think of, what then distinguishes those cases. I imagine some are going to think, well, childbirth has been intentional in that there was a sexual encounter that was part of this, but I addressed that in the article. And I think that if one were to play that out in the case of organ donation, I mean, imagine a company official for a corporation that was responsible for some kind of toxin in the environment that led to a person's organ failing. So there's an actual responsibility there. Do we want the court to require that executive sacrifices an organ to compensate? A very different feeling when we look at this in a slightly different context.
Yeah, wow, that is pretty helpful. Thank you. Well, I could ask questions all day about this, so I really recommend anyone watching this to go to read the article. The link to the article will be in the video description below, and we'll have a couple other links down there as well. Allyson, why don't you tell us where could people go to learn a little bit more about your work with Justice Revival?
You can find us online at justicerevival.org. If you go to the justicerevival.org/events page, you'll also see some information about an upcoming workshop that I'll be teaching through Yale Divinity School's Center for Continuing Education in February of the coming year. That's another great opportunity to do a deeper dive into human rights from a Christian perspective.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for chatting today, Allyson.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it.